The morning shift alarm buzzed through the maintenance bay as Ji-hoon stretched his tired muscles. 3 years of working on Omega Station had given him calloused hands and a reputation for fixing things that others threw away. The human mechanic took pride in his small workshop tucked away in the outer ring of the massive space station. Ji-hoon wiped engine grease from his fingers with an old cloth as he watched the daily transport. Ships docked through the bay windows. Today felt different somehow. The usual cargo haulers and passenger shuttles were joined by something he had never seen before. A sleek vessel with curved walls and shimmering metal landed at the diplomatic platform. Its design was unlike anything in his repair manuals. The ship's doors opened with a soft hiss, and out stepped the strangest group of beings Ji-hoon had ever witnessed. They were tall and walked with careful steps, their scaled skin catching the station's bright lights. Long robes covered their bodies, and the fabric seemed to change colors as they moved. These were the Vorthak, though Ji-hoon only knew them from stories other mechanics told during break times. At the center of their group walked a much smaller figure. This one was clearly young, maybe a child by their species standards. The little Vorthak clutched something tightly against their chest, and even from his distant workshop, Ji-hoon could see tears running down the scaled face. The group moved through the station with purpose, their leader checking a handheld device that seemed to be guiding them somewhere, but the young one kept falling behind, stopping to look at their broken treasure with obvious sadness. The adult Vorthak tried to hurry the child along, but their patience was clearly running thin. Ji-hoon turned back to his current project, a small mining drone with a burned-out power coupling. It was simple work compared to the massive cargo ships he usually repaired, but every job deserved his full attention. He had learned long ago that treating small problems with care often led to bigger opportunities. The sound of soft crying made him look up from his work. The young Vorthak had somehow separated from their group and now stood outside his workshop. The child's large eyes were filled with tears as they held up their broken possession for Ji-hoon to see. It was some kind of mechanical toy, about the size of his fist. The craftsmanship was incredible, with tiny gears visible through crystal windows and delicate metal parts that seemed to flow like water. But several pieces hung loose, and the crystal heart that should have glowed with inner light was dark and cold. "Please help," the child said in broken galactic standard, the universal language used throughout the station. "My friend is hurt." "Can you fix?" Ji-hoon set down his tools and approached the young alien carefully. He had worked with many different species over the years, but the Vorthak were known for being formal and distant. This child's direct plea for help was touching in its simplicity. "Let me take a look," Ji-hoon said gently, extending his hands. The child hesitated for a moment, then carefully placed the broken toy in the human's palms. Up close, the device was even more amazing. The metal felt warm despite being powerless, and the crystal components seemed to pulse with their own inner rhythm. Ji-hoon had never seen technology like this before. The engineering was far beyond anything humans had developed, yet something about its design spoke to him on an instinctive level. "What happened to it?" Ji-hoon asked, turning the toy over in his hands to examine the damage. "Ship shook very hard during travel," the child explained, wiping their nose with a scaled hand. "Friend fell from my sleeping place. Now friend will not wake up or play with me." Ji-hoon could see the problem immediately. The toy's delicate internal mechanisms had been jarred loose during the rough journey. Several connection points had separated, and one of the tiny gears had cracked down the middle. Most mechanics would have declared it beyond repair, especially without knowledge of Vorthak technology. But Ji-hoon saw possibilities where others might see only problems. His years of fixing impossible machinery had taught him to look beyond the obvious solutions. Sometimes the best repairs came from understanding what a machine was trying to do, rather than just how it was supposed to work. "Your friend is very sick," Ji-hoon said carefully, not wanting to promise something he might not be able to deliver. "But I think I might be able to help. It will take time, and I will need to take your friend apart to see what is wrong inside." The child's eyes widened with fear at the thought of their precious toy being disassembled. "You will not hurt friend more?" "I promise to be very careful," Ji-hoon replied. "I have fixed many broken things, and I know how to be gentle with something that is special to you." From the main corridor came the sound of adult voices calling in the Vorthak language. The child looked torn between staying with their toy and returning to their group. Ji-hoon could see the internal struggle playing out on the young alien's expressive features. My family calls, the child said sadly, but I cannot leave friend alone. You can trust me, Jihoon said, kneeling down to meet the child at eye level. I will work very hard to make your friend better. When you come back tomorrow, maybe they will be able to play with you again. The calling voices grew more urgent and several adult Vorthak appeared at the entrance to the workshop. They spoke rapidly to the child in their own language, clearly expecting immediate compliance. But the young one stood firm, pointing to Jihoon and explaining the situation in quick, desperate words. One of the adults stepped forward, their robes shimmering with patterns that suggested authority. They studied Jihoon with intelligent eyes, taking in the human's work clothes, the tools scattered across the bench, and the careful way he held the precious toy. You believe you can repair this device? The adult asked in perfect galactic standard. I would like to try, Jihoon replied honestly. I cannot promise success, but I have experience with delicate machinery. Your child's friend deserves every chance I can give it. The adult Vorthak considered this for a long moment, then nodded slowly. They spoke to the child, who brightened considerably and hugged Jihoon's leg before running to rejoin their group. As the diplomatic party disappeared into the station's corridors, Jihoon carried the broken toy to his workbench. He had no idea that his simple act of kindness toward a crying child would soon change everything he thought he knew about his place in the galaxy. Jihoon placed the broken toy under his brightest work lamp and pulled up his favorite stool. The workshop felt quieter than usual as the station's day shift wound down around him. Most mechanics would be heading to the recreation deck or their quarters, but something about this particular repair called to him in a way he could not explain. He picked up his smallest magnifying glass and began examining every detail of the toy's construction. The craftsmanship was beyond anything he had encountered in his years of fixing machines. Each tiny component seemed to serve multiple purposes, and the way they connected together showed a level of engineering that made human technology look primitive by comparison. The crystal heart at the toy's center was the most fascinating part. Even in its darkened state, Jihoon could see layers of structure inside the transparent material. Thin metal threads ran through the crystal like veins, connecting to contact points that had been jarred loose during the accident. This was clearly the power source, but it worked on principles he had never studied. Jihoon carefully removed the toy's outer casing, revealing the intricate mechanisms inside. Gears no bigger than his fingernail meshed with components that seemed to bend light around their edges. Some parts appeared to be made from materials that shifted between solid and liquid states as he watched. The engineering was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. He spent the first hour just mapping out how everything connected. His notebook filled with rough sketches and measurements as he tried to understand the logic behind the design. Some connections were obvious, following patterns he recognized from other machines, but others seemed to defy everything he thought he knew about how mechanical devices worked. The cracked gear was the most obvious problem. The break had caused a cascade failure throughout the toy's movement systems, but as Jihoon studied the damage more closely, he realized that simply replacing the gear would not be enough. The crystal matrix had been disrupted, and several of the hair-thin connecting wires had snapped when the toy hit the floor. Most mechanics would have given up at this point. The toy required materials and techniques that did not exist in any human workshop. But Jihoon had spent years learning to make do with whatever he had available. His reputation came from finding creative solutions when the proper parts were impossible to get. He started with the broken gear, using his smallest cutting tools to carefully remove the damaged section. His parts bins contained dozens of gears salvaged from broken devices over the years. None were exactly the right size or material, but Jihoon had learned to modify components to fit new purposes. A gear from a failed navigation computer was close to the right diameter. Jihoon spent an hour carefully reshaping it, using techniques he had learned from an old Zenthari engineer, who had taught him that patience was more valuable than precision tools. The modified gear fit perfectly into the toy's mechanism, though it was made from different metal than the original. The crystal connections were more challenging. The broken wires were thinner than human hair, and made from a metal that did not appear in any of his reference materials. But Jihoon had wire salvage from communication equipment that might work as a substitute. He spent 2 hours carefully threading new connections through the crystal matrix, following the patterns of the broken originals. As he worked, Jihoon found himself falling into the focused state that came with his most challenging repairs. The outside world faded away until only the toy and his tools existed. His hands moved with practiced precision, making connections and adjustments based on instinct as much as knowledge. The power coupling required the most creative thinking. The toy's original design used energy flows that human technology could not duplicate. But Jihoon had worked with enough different alien systems to recognize similar patterns in other devices. A small power cell from a broken scanning device might provide the right kind of energy output. He modified the power cell carefully, adding resistors and flow regulators salvaged from other projects. The energy signature would be different from what the toy expected, but Jihoon thought the crystal matrix might adapt to the new input. It was a guess based on how he had seen other Vorthak technology respond to unexpected conditions. By midnight, Jihoon had reassembled most of the toy's internal mechanisms. Everything fit together properly, and his modifications seemed to integrate well with the original design. But the real test would come when he tried to power it up again. He connected his improvised power system to the crystal heart and held his breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, light began to build inside the crystal. The glow was different from what he had expected, with colors that seemed to shift and dance through the transparent material. The toy's eyes flickered once, twice, then opened fully. They glowed with the same shifting light as the crystal heart. But there was something more there. Intelligence, awareness. This was not just a mechanical device, but something approaching artificial life. The toy sat up on Jihoon's workbench and looked around with obvious curiosity. When its gaze fell on the human mechanic, it tilted its head in what looked like a question. Then it opened its mouth and produced a series of musical sounds that filled the workshop with harmony. But something was different from what Jihoon had expected. The toy's movements were smoother than before, and its responses seemed more complex. The modifications he had made were not just repairs, but improvements. The combination of human engineering and Vorthak design had created something new. The toy stood up and walked across the workbench, exploring its environment with careful steps. When it reached the edge, it looked back at Jihoon and chirped again, a sound full of gratitude and joy. Then it began to demonstrate capabilities that had not been part of its original programming. It could project small holographic images into the air above its hands. It could analyze the chemical composition of materials by touching them. Most remarkably, it seemed to understand Jihoon's emotional state and responded with appropriate sounds and gestures. Jihoon sat back in his chair, amazed by what he had accomplished. He had not just repaired the toy, but had somehow enhanced it beyond its original design. The combination of technologies had created something neither species could have achieved alone. As the station's night cycle deepened around him, Jihoon carefully placed the restored toy in a secure box. Tomorrow he would return it to the child who had trusted him with their most precious possession. He had no way of knowing that word of his achievement was already spreading through channels he could not imagine, reaching ears that would change his life forever. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to Jihoon's workshop. He had barely finished his first cup of coffee when the young Vorthak child appeared at his doorway, flanked by several adults whose robes seemed more elaborate than those he had seen the previous day. Their scaled faces showed expressions he was learning to read as curiosity and concern. The child rushed forward eagerly, their large eyes bright with hope. "Did you help my friend? Is my friend better now?" Jihoon smiled and carefully lifted the secured box from his workbench. "I think your friend missed you very much," he said, opening the container to reveal the restored toy. The mechanical companion immediately sat up and turned toward the child. Its eyes glowed with that strange new light Jihoon had discovered, and it extended its small arms in what was clearly a gesture of greeting. The child gasped with delight and scooped up their treasured friend. What happened next surprised everyone in the workshop. The toy began to sing, producing melodies more complex and beautiful than any mechanical device should have been capable of creating. But more than that, it projected tiny holographic butterflies that danced around the child's head, their wings shimmering with colors that had no names. The adult Vorthak stepped closer, their earlier composure completely forgotten. One of them, an elderly figure whose robes bore intricate patterns of silver thread, reached out tentatively to touch one of the holographic projections. His scaled hand passed through the light, but sensors in the toy registered the interaction and caused the butterfly to flutter playfully around his fingers. "This is impossible," the elder whispered in his own language, then switched to galactic standards so Jihoon could understand. These capabilities were not part of the original design. "How did you achieve such modifications?" Jihoon rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly feeling awkward under so much attention. "I just fixed what was broken and added some parts I had lying around." The toy seemed to adapt to the changes on its own. The elder Vorthak introduced himself as Baekhyun, a senior engineer in the diplomatic mission. His questions came rapidly as he tried to understand what Jihoon had accomplished. How had he identified the power requirements? What materials had he used for the new connections? Most importantly, how had he achieved integration between human and Vorthak technologies that their best scientists considered theoretically impossible? "I do not really know," Jihoon admitted honestly. "I just looked at what needed to be done and found ways to do it." The toy helped by accepting the changes I made. Word of the remarkable repair spread through the station with surprising speed. By midday, Jihoon found himself receiving visits from species he had never seen before. A group of crystalline beings called the Helix Collective sent representatives to examine his work. 3 different merchant captains offered to pay premium rates for him to examine their most challenging mechanical problems. The station administrator, a bureaucratic Zenthari named Hyunwoo, arrived in the early afternoon with a tablet full of requests for Jihoon services. Ships that had been scheduled for major repairs at expensive facilities were being diverted to Omega Station, specifically to seek out the human mechanic who could work miracles. "I do not understand." "What you did," Hyunwoo said, his 4 eyes blinking independently as he studied the enhanced toy. "But every species on this station is talking about it. I have messages from engineering guilds, diplomatic missions, and private collectors all asking about your capabilities." Jihoon felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention. He had simply tried to help a crying child, using the same techniques he applied to every repair job. The idea that his work was somehow revolutionary had never occurred to him. The young Vorthak child, meanwhile, was having the time of their life. The enhanced toy had become a source of wonder for everyone who saw it. The holographic displays could now show complex scenes from the child's imagination. The musical abilities had expanded to include harmonies that seemed to respond to the emotional state of listeners. Most remarkably, the toy appeared to be learning and growing more capable with each passing hour. Elder Baekhyun spent most of the day in Jihoon's workshop, documenting every detail of the repair work. He took photographs and made detailed notes, but admitted that much of what Jihoon had accomplished defied his understanding of how the technologies should interact. "Your species approaches problems very differently than ours," Baekhyun observed as he watched Jihoon work on a broken cargo scanner that had been declared unfixable by its original manufacturers. "We seek to understand every principle before attempting a solution. You seem to understand solutions before learning the principles behind them." Other aliens began bringing their most challenging problems to the small workshop. A Kalari trader presented a navigation computer that had been corrupted by exposure to exotic radiation. Jihoon studied it for an hour, then began replacing components with parts that should not have been compatible according to any engineering manual. The device not only began working again, but performed better than its original specifications. A delegation of mechanical artists from the Spiral Confederation arrived with a sculpture that was supposed to transform based on viewer emotions, but had been stuck in one configuration for decades. Jihoon spent an afternoon tracing its neural pathways and discovered that its sensors had become overwhelmed by too much input. By adding simple filtering circuits made from spare parts, he restored its ability to respond and even enhanced its sensitivity to subtle emotional changes. Each successful repair added to Jihoon's growing reputation, but he remained focused on the work itself, rather than the attention it brought. He treated every problem with the same methodical approach, whether it belonged to a child's toy or a million-credit starship component. As the day ended, Elder Baekhyun made a request that surprised everyone. He asked permission to send a detailed report about Jihoon's capabilities to his superiors in the Vorthak government. The implications of human Vorthak technological integration, he explained, were too significant to keep within the confines of one space station. "Your work today may have importance beyond simple repairs," Baekhyun told Jihoon seriously. There are those in my government who need to know what you have accomplished here. Ji-hoon agreed without fully understanding what he was consenting to. He was still thinking about the next day's scheduled repairs, unaware that his name was about to be transmitted across interstellar distances to reach the most powerful beings in Vorthak space. 3 star systems away from Omega Station, Emperor Seonghwa of the Vorthak Empire sat in his private study aboard the flagship Eternal, Dawn. The massive vessel drifted silently through space as the Emperor reviewed reports from diplomatic missions across the galaxy. Most contained routine updates about trade agreements and border negotiations. But one file had captured his complete attention. The report from Elder Baekhyun contained detailed photographs and technical analysis of something that should have been impossible. A human mechanic with no formal training in Vorthak technology had not only repaired his son's precious companion, but had somehow enhanced it beyond its original capabilities. The implications made the Emperor's scaled hands tremble slightly as he turned the pages. Prince Yosang entered the study carrying the enhanced toy, which had become his constant companion since returning from the diplomatic mission. The young Vorthak's eyes still sparkled with wonder every time the device created new holographic displays, or sang melodies that seemed to come from his own imagination. "Father, you wanted to see my friend again?" Yosang asked, setting the toy carefully on the Emperor's desk. Emperor Seonghwa nodded and activated his most sensitive analysis equipment. For the 3rd time that day, he studied the impossible fusion of technologies that somehow worked better together than either should have alone. Human engineering principles had been woven through Vorthak design in ways that created entirely new possibilities. "Tell me again about this human," the Emperor requested, though he had already memorized every detail of his son's account. Prince Yeosang settled into his favorite chair and launched into the story with enthusiasm that had not dimmed over the days since their return. He described Ji-hoon's humble workshop, his gentle manner with a crying child, and the incredible skill he had shown while working through the night to restore the broken companion. "He asked for nothing in return, Father. No payment, no recognition. He simply wanted to help because I was sad. And when my friend came back to life, the human seemed as surprised as anyone by what he had accomplished." The Emperor listened carefully, not just to the words but to the emotions behind them. His son had been deeply moved by the encounter, and that meant more to Emperor Seonghwa than any technical achievement. The Vorthak valued kindness and honor above all else, and this human had displayed both qualities without expectation of reward. But beyond personal gratitude, the Emperor saw possibilities that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. For centuries, the Vorthak Empire had been slowly falling behind other civilizations in technological innovation. Their rigid social structure and obsession with perfection often prevented the kind of creative thinking that true breakthroughs required. The human approach to problem-solving represented everything the Vorthak lacked. Whereas people demanded complete understanding before taking action, humans seemed willing to experiment and learn from failure. Where Vorthak engineers followed established procedures, humans created new solutions from whatever materials were available. Emperor Seonghwa activated his communication system and requested immediate audience with his most trusted advisors. Within the hour, the study filled with the Empire's greatest minds in technology, diplomacy, and military strategy. Each had studied Elder Baekhyun's report, and all understood the significance of what they were discussing. "The human demonstrates capabilities that our greatest engineers cannot explain," reported Chief Technician Min Seok, his voice filled with professional admiration. "The integration of technologies follows no known principles, yet it works flawlessly. More than that, it creates emergent properties that exceed the sum of its parts." Defense Minister Taeyong raised concerns about sharing advanced technology with species that might become military rivals. But Emperor Seonghwa had already considered these objections and found them lacking in vision. "The humans are not our enemies," the Emperor stated firmly. "They are a young species with capabilities we need, while we possess knowledge they could benefit from. The question is not whether we should make contact, but how we can do so in ways that benefit both civilizations." Diplomatic advisor Yongen presented analysis of humanity's political structure and technological development. Humans were rapidly expanding through their local region of space, but they lacked the scientific foundation that older civilizations had developed over millennia. They compensated for this with remarkable adaptability and creativity. A formal alliance could provide humans with advanced scientific knowledge while giving us access to their innovative thinking, Yongan concluded. But such a partnership must be approached carefully. Humans value independence and might be suspicious of offers that seem too generous. Emperor Seonghua had been thinking along similar lines. Direct diplomatic contact with human governments might be met with fear or mistrust, but approaching through individuals who had already demonstrated positive qualities could create a foundation of mutual respect. What do we know about this mechanic's background? The Emperor asked. Elder Baekhyun's report contained limited personal information about Ji-hoon. He worked alone, lived simply, and had earned respect throughout the diverse community of Omega Station. His reputation came from his willingness to help anyone who brought him broken machinery, regardless of their species or ability to pay. He represents the best qualities of his species, observed cultural analyst Kyung-soo. Compassionate, skilled, humble. If we could establish friendship with such individuals, it might open paths to broader cooperation. The Emperor made his decision with the certainty that had guided the Vorthak Empire for 3 centuries. He would personally meet this human mechanic, not as a diplomatic mission, but as a father grateful for kindness shown to his child. Such an approach would allow both species to evaluate each other without the pressures of formal negotiations. Prepare the Eternal Dawn for departure to Omega Station, Emperor Seonghua commanded. I wish to meet the human who restored my son's companion and treated him with such kindness. His advisors exchanged glances of surprise and concern. The Emperor had not left the core systems for personal reasons in over 50 years. Such a journey would be unprecedented and would certainly attract attention throughout the galaxy. Your Majesty, ventured Defense Minister Taeyong, perhaps it would be more appropriate to invite the human to visit us. The security implications of your departure will be managed appropriately, the Emperor interrupted. This mechanic showed kindness to my son when he had no idea who the child was. I will show him the same respect by coming to his place of work, rather than demanding he come to mine. As his staff began preparations for the historic journey, Emperor Seonghua looked again at his son's enhanced companion. The little device seemed to sense his attention and projected a holographic flower that bloomed slowly in the air above his desk. The beauty of the display was enhanced by knowing it came from the fusion of 2 different approaches to creation. Perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Different species learning to combine their strengths rather than competing with their weaknesses. 2 weeks after the toy repair that had started everything, Ji-hoon noticed unusual activity around Omega Station. Ships he did not recognize were arriving daily, and station security seemed more alert than usual. The human mechanic paid little attention to these changes, focusing instead on the steady stream of repair, jobs that had kept him busy since word of his abilities spread. He was replacing the plasma conduits in a Helix collective mining drone when Station Administrator Hyunwoo appeared at his workshop door. The Zenthari official looked nervous, his 4 eyes blinking rapidly as he clutched an ornate message cylinder against his chest. Ji-hoon, you have received an official communication, Hyunwoo announced, his voice higher than usual. This arrived by special courier from the Vorthak Empire. The courier insisted it must be delivered to you personally. Ji-hoon set down his tools and wiped his hands on his work cloth. The message cylinder was beautiful, made from what looked like crystallized starlight with metal inlays that seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. He had never seen craftsmanship like this before. I cannot read Vorthak writing, Ji-hoon said, examining the elegant symbols carved into the cylinder's surface. Could you help me translate it? Hyunwoo activated his universal translator and aimed it at the message. As the device processed the complex formal language, his expression changed from curiosity to shock to something approaching panic. This is impossible, the administrator whispered. According to this translation, you have been invited to meet personally with Emperor Seonghua aboard his flagship. The invitation is signed with the imperial seal and requests your presence at your earliest convenience. Ji-hoon looked at the message cylinder again, wondering if there had been some mistake. Are you sure you translated it correctly? Why would an emperor want to meet with me? Before Hyunwoo could answer, another figure appeared in the workshop doorway. Elder Baekhyun entered with the same ceremonial robes he had worn during his first visit, but his manner was much more formal than before. The translation is correct, Baekhyun confirmed. His Imperial Majesty has traveled personally to this system to meet with you. This is an honor that has not been granted to any non-Vorthak in over 2 centuries. Jihoon felt overwhelmed by the implications of what he was hearing. He had simply fixed a child's broken toy, and now the ruler of a galactic empire wanted to meet him personally. It seemed like something from a dream rather than reality. "I do not understand," Jihoon said honestly. "What could an emperor possibly want from a space station mechanic?" Elder Baekhyun's expression softened slightly. "His Majesty was deeply moved by your kindness toward Prince Yeosang and impressed by your technical abilities. The toy you repaired has become something of a legend within our government. Scientists and engineers throughout the empire have studied your work and cannot explain how you achieved such results." The elder Vorthak explained that Emperor Seonghwa saw possibilities in human-Vorthak cooperation that went far beyond simple trade agreements. The combination of human creativity with Vorthak precision could benefit both civilizations in ways that neither could achieve alone. "But this is just an invitation," Baekhyun emphasized. "His Majesty understands that you have the right to decline. He comes not as a conqueror demanding tribute, but as a father grateful for kindness shown to his child." Jihoon considered the offer carefully. Meeting with an alien emperor carried obvious risks, but his curiosity about Vorthak technology was strong. The toy repair had shown him glimpses of engineering principles he had never encountered before. Learning more could help him become a better mechanic. "If I agree to this meeting, would I be able to return to my workshop afterward?" Jihoon asked. "Of course," Baekhyun replied. "His Majesty has no desire to force you into any commitments. This meeting is simply an opportunity for 2 individuals to speak honestly about possibilities for the future." Station Administrator Hyunwoo looked like he might faint from the stress of hosting such an important diplomatic event. "The security arrangements alone will require completely reorganizing station operations. We have never dealt with imperial visits before." "Actually," Baekhyun said, "His Majesty prefers to meet aboard his flagship. The Eternal Dawn has arrived at the edge of this system and awaits your decision. If you agree to the meeting, arrangements can be made for your transport and safe return." Jihoon made his decision based on the same instincts that had guided him through 3 years of challenging repairs. Sometimes the most interesting problems came from unexpected directions, and this seemed like an opportunity to learn something completely new. "I would be honored to meet with Emperor Seonghwa," Jihoon said simply. "When would he like to schedule this meeting?" Baekhyun smiled for the first time since entering the workshop. "His Majesty hoped you would be willing to accompany me today if that suits your schedule." The flagship's shuttle is already docked at the diplomatic platform. As Jihoon gathered a few personal items and secured his workshop, word of the Imperial invitation spread throughout Omega Station. Aliens of dozens of species gathered to watch the human mechanic board the shuttle that would take him to meet one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. The shuttle itself was a marvel of engineering that made Jihoon eager to see what other wonders awaited him. Its hull seemed to be made from liquid metal that shifted and flowed as they traveled, while the interior combined organic curves with crystalline structures that pulsed with their own inner light. Prince Yeosang was waiting aboard the shuttle, clutching his enhanced companion and practically bouncing with excitement. The young Vorthak had insisted on personally escorting Jihoon to meet his father, and his joy at seeing the human again was infectious. "My friend has learned so many new songs since you fixed him," Yeosang announced, holding up the toy. "Father says you made him better than he was before. Is that really possible?" "Sometimes fixing something gives us a chance to make it even better," Jihoon replied, watching the toy project holographic musical notes that danced through the shuttle's cabin. "Your friend was already special. I just helped him become more himself." As the shuttle approached the massive Imperial flagship, Jihoon realized that his simple act of kindness toward a crying child was about to change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The Eternal Dawn was unlike anything Jihoon had ever seen. The Imperial flagship stretched for kilometers through space, its hull covered in patterns that seemed to tell the entire history of the Vorthak Empire. As their shuttle approached the massive vessel, Jihoon could see that parts of the ship were actually alive, with organic sections that pulsed and breathed alongside the mechanical components. Prince Yeosang served as tour guide during their approach, pointing out features with the enthusiasm that only children could maintain. "Those are the living gardens where we grow food during long journeys. And see those crystal spires? They collect starlight to power the ship's consciousness. The ship has consciousness? Jihoon asked, fascinated by the concept. All Vorthak ships do, the prince explained matter-of-factly. Ours is very old and very wise. She's been Father's companion for longer than I have been alive. When the shuttle docked, Jihoon was greeted by an honor guard wearing ceremonial armor that seemed to be carved from single pieces of star metal. Their formal salutes were precise and respectful, but he could see curiosity in their eyes as they studied the first human ever to board their flagship. The corridors of the Eternal Dawn were works of art as much as functional spaces. Every surface told stories through intricate carvings and crystalline inlays that glowed with soft light. The ceiling displayed a real-time map of their location in space, with stars and nebulae moving slowly overhead as the ship traveled. Prince Yeosang led Jihoon through sections of the ship that few outsiders had ever seen. They passed libraries filled with crystalline data storage that held the accumulated knowledge of centuries. They walked through workshops where Vorthak artisans created devices that blended technology with living systems in ways human science had never imagined. Father wants to meet you in the heart chamber, Yeosang explained as they approached a doorway that seemed to be made from pure energy, held in solid form. It is the most sacred place on our ship. Only family and the most honored guests are allowed inside. The heart chamber took Jihoon's breath away. The circular room was dominated by a massive crystal formation that pulsed with the rhythm of a living heart. This was the ship's consciousness made visible, a fusion of organic neural networks with crystalline computing matrices that achieved something beyond artificial intelligence. Emperor Seonghwa stood before the heart crystal, his imposing figure draped in robes that seemed to contain fragments of space itself. When he turned to greet Jihoon, the human was struck by the intelligence and kindness in the alien ruler's ancient eyes. "Welcome aboard the Eternal Dawn," the Emperor said, his voice carrying authority that came from centuries of leadership. "I am honored that you accepted my invitation." Jihoon found himself bowing instinctively, though he had no training in Vorthak customs. "The honor is mine, Your Majesty. Thank you for allowing me to see such wonders." Emperor Seonghwa gestured for Jihoon to approach the heart crystal. "Our ship wishes to meet you. She has been curious about the human who accomplished what our greatest engineers thought impossible." As Jihoon placed his hand on the crystal surface, warmth flowed up his arm, and images filled his mind. He saw the ship's birth in orbital construction yards centuries ago, her first journeys to distant stars, and the countless beings she had carried safely through the dangers of space. More than that, he sensed her personality, ancient wisdom combined with gentle curiosity about the universe she traveled through. "She likes you," Prince Yeosang announced with delight. "Look how brightly she glows when you touch her." The conversation that followed would reshape galactic politics for generations. Emperor Seonghwa spoke with surprising openness about his people's strengths and weaknesses. The Vorthak had achieved technological marvels and built a civilization that had lasted for millennia, but their rigid thinking sometimes prevented them from solving problems that required creative flexibility. "Your approach to repairing my son's companion revealed possibilities we had never considered," the Emperor explained. "You saw connections between technologies that our scientists declared incompatible. More importantly, you acted with kindness toward a child you had never met before." Jihoon listened with growing amazement as the Emperor outlined a vision that seemed impossible in scope. The Vorthak Empire sought to establish formal relations with humanity, beginning with technological and cultural exchange programs. Human engineers and mechanics would be welcomed in Vorthak space, while Vorthak scientists and scholars would visit human worlds to share their accumulated knowledge. "But why start with me?" Jihoon asked. "I am just a mechanic who fixes broken things. Surely your diplomats could arrange better contacts with human governments." Emperor Seonghwa smiled, an expression that transformed his imposing features. "Governments negotiate based on fear and self-interest. But you helped my son simply because he was sad. That kindness tells me more about humanity's character than any diplomatic message could convey." The Emperor's ultimate vision was even more ambitious. He spoke of a partnership that could elevate both species, combining Vorthak precision with human adaptability to tackle challenges that neither could face alone. The restoration of a child's toy had revealed the potential that existed when different approaches to problem-solving worked together. "I cannot speak for all humans," Jihoon said carefully, "but I can promise that many of my people would be honored to work alongside yours." We have always been curious about the universe and eager to learn from others. Prince Yosang had been playing with his enhanced companion throughout the conversation, but now he approached his father with an idea that surprised everyone. Could Jihoon stay with us for a while? He could teach our engineers his fixing methods, and we could show him our technologies. It would be like the exchanges you talked about, but starting small. Emperor Seonghwa considered his son's suggestion with the seriousness he gave to all matters of state. Would you be willing to spend some time aboard our ship as our guest? Not as a prisoner or a test subject, but as a friend sharing knowledge with friends? Jihoon thought about his small workshop on Omega Station and the steady stream of repairs that awaited his return. Then he looked around the heart chamber, with its impossible fusion of technology and consciousness, and realized this was an opportunity that might never come again. I would be honored to learn from your people, Jihoon replied, and if I can teach them anything useful in return, that would make the experience even more valuable. As the Eternal Dawn changed course toward the heart of Vorthak space, carrying the first human ever to travel as a guest of the Imperial family, Jihoon understood that his life had been forever changed by a simple act of kindness toward a crying child. 6 months later, Jihoon stood in a workshop that had been specially designed for him aboard the Eternal Dawn. The space combined the best of human and Vorthak engineering, with tool systems that responded to his thoughts and materials that could adapt their properties to match his needs. Around him, a dozen Vorthak engineers watched in fascination as he demonstrated repair techniques that had become legendary throughout their empire. The project on his workbench was ambitious even by imperial standards. A crystalline matrix that controlled the atmospheric systems for an entire colony world had been damaged by a solar storm. Traditional Vorthak methods would have required months to grow a replacement, but Jihoon had proposed something different. Using techniques he had developed during his time aboard the flagship, Jihoon was weaving human fiber optic technology through the Vorthak crystal structure. The hybrid system would not only repair the damage but would make the entire network more resilient to future disruptions. Prince Yeosang, now one of Jihoon's most eager students, handed him a connector he had fabricated using principles from both civilizations. Is this the right configuration for the neural pathways? Perfect, Jihoon replied, carefully integrating the component into the matrix. You are learning to think like both human and Vorthak engineer. That combination will let you solve problems that neither species could handle alone. The successful completion of the atmospheric controller marked a milestone that resonated throughout Vorthak space. News of the hybrid technology spread to every world in the Empire, demonstrating that the partnership between species could produce practical benefits rather than just theoretical possibilities. Emperor Seonghwa had been watching the project's progress from his command center, and he joined them in the workshop as the final connections were completed. The massive crystal matrix hummed with new energy, its patterns more complex and beautiful than anything either species had created independently. This device will protect millions of lives, the Emperor said, studying the intricate fusion of technologies. But more than that, it represents proof that our peoples can build a better future together. The success aboard the Eternal Dawn had inspired similar cooperation throughout both civilizations. Human mechanics and engineers had established workshops on Vorthak worlds, while Vorthak scientists had set up research centers in human space. The exchange of knowledge was accelerating technological development for both species at unprecedented rates. Station Administrator Hyunwoo had sent regular updates about changes on Omega Station. Jihoon's former workshop had become a shrine of sorts, visited by beings from dozens of species who wanted to see where the famous alliance had begun. The station itself had become a hub for interspecies cooperation, with representatives from many governments establishing permanent offices there. But the most significant changes were happening at deeper levels. Human creativity was inspiring Vorthak artists to explore new forms of expression, while Vorthak philosophy was teaching humans to consider longer-term consequences of their rapid technological development. The cultural exchange was proving as valuable as the scientific collaboration. I have received a message from the Human Colonial Council, Emperor Seonghwa announced during one of their regular planning sessions. They have formally requested establishment of diplomatic relations with the Vorthak Empire. The process you began with kindness toward my son has grown into something that will reshape our region of the galaxy. Jihoon felt overwhelmed by the implications of what had started with a simple toy repair. I never imagined that helping one crying child could lead to something so important. The greatest changes often begin with the smallest acts, the Emperor replied. Your willingness to help without expecting reward revealed the qualities that make humanity valuable as partners. Kindness, creativity, and determination to solve problems regardless of how difficult they appear. Prince Yeosang had been working on a special project during the months of Jihoon's visit. The enhanced toy that had started everything had evolved far beyond its original purpose, incorporating new capabilities that reflected everything the young Vorthak had learned from his human teacher. I want you to have this, Yeosang said, presenting Jihoon with a new device that looked like a fusion of the original toy with human engineering principles. It contains recordings of everything we have discovered together, and it can teach others what you have taught me. The gift was more than a memento. It represented a new class of educational device that could help spread the cooperative techniques they had developed to workshops and schools throughout both civilizations. Knowledge that had once been limited to a few experts could now be shared with anyone willing to learn. As the Eternal Dawn prepared to return Jihoon to Omega Station, the human mechanic realized that he was not the same person who had boarded the ship months earlier. The experience had shown him possibilities he had never imagined and given him skills that would serve both species for years to come. The farewell ceremony was attended by representatives from throughout the Vorthak Empire. Engineers, artists, philosophers, and government officials had all come to honor the human who had helped bridge the gap between their civilizations. Their formal speeches praised his technical abilities and diplomatic contributions. But Jihoon knew the real accomplishment was simpler. He had shown that beings from different worlds could work together when they approached each other with respect and genuine desire to help. The alliance between humans and Vorthak had grown from that foundation of mutual understanding and shared goals. Years later, historians would mark Jihoon's toy repair as the moment when humanity took its first step toward becoming a major power in galactic civilization. The Human-Vorthak Alliance had opened doors to relationships with dozens of other species and established principles of cooperation that transformed interstellar politics. But for Jihoon himself, the most important legacy was much more personal. Throughout both civilizations, workshops had been established where beings from different species worked side by side, sharing knowledge and solving problems together. The spirit of cooperation that had begun in one small repair bay had spread to touch millions of lives. Prince Yeosang, now a skilled engineer in his own right, kept the original enhanced toy as a reminder of where it all began. Sometimes during quiet moments in his own workshop, he would activate its holographic displays and remember the human who had taught him that the best way to fix broken things was to understand what they were trying to become. The toy continued to function perfectly, its hybrid technology serving as proof that different approaches to creation could produce something more beautiful than either could achieve alone, just like the alliance between the species who had built it together.